Okay, 19.2. This is really the chapter on macroevolution, or the section on macroevolution. We call it patterns and processes. So yeah, it's patterns and processes, but it's about large-scale evolutionary change. If you remember, we were talking about microevolution when we're doing allele frequency changes. So allele frequency is changing, small portions of a percent at a time and gradually gaining ground. We're not seeing very much change in a population. We're seeing a greater propensity to be a certain gene or a certain allele of that gene, but you're not seeing gross changes in the organisms. That takes a much longer period of time. So microevolution versus macro. So these are the four here: speciation, extinction, rate of evolution, adaptive radiation, convergent. We've been talking about this one and this one for some time. We've actually discussed this, and this, and this. And to a degree, we've discussed coevolution. All right. So speciation. This is something to ponder. 99% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct. The reason we can say this is that we're living in now, and today represents the number of millions of species, 2 to 3 million to 100 million, depending on estimates. But 1 million species, 2 million species is such a small percentage of what has ever lived in the last 3.9 billion years of life history, because now is just a sliver. A million years is just a sliver. It's 1 over 3,900 in years of life. Okay, so what we have today represents approximately 1% of all species. So Earth's story is largely in the past, obviously. The present is only now. Okay, so usually natural selection leads to speciation. In one form or another, the idea of natural selection. Species will run out of organisms, not pass on enough genes, or speciation occurred to continue the line, but it's no longer that species, which is all natural selection. But mass extinctions do occur. And these are planetary mass extinctions, which can wipe out a great number of species. But remember, the species that are living at one time still only represent a very small portion of all species ever. So even a mass extinction event doesn't necessarily wipe out a great number of species all time, but it does wipe out a great percentage of species at one time. For instance, I'd have to check this, but I think the Permian knocked out 96% of all species. Okay, in the background extinction events, that's kind of a business as usual. Some species are just going to lose ground. Like I think we just lost the white rhino. It's a human problem. We caused it, but that is kind of background extinction. No major environmental change for us, but for the rhinos, it was human encroachment, poaching. So that could be it. It could be numerous small events. Again, human problems. Extinction of a species or population does open the door for other species to evolve. So that's why we have this here. Okay, the dinosaurs that died gave an opportunity for the mammals to now outcompete the remaining individuals. And this example here is the mass extinction events on a timeline. And you can see that over here we have percentage of species becoming extinct. And then vertically, we've got a representation of the timeline on the x-axis here. Right, so 450 million years ago is the fossil record's first demonstration of a mass extinction. Okay, so on the y-axis, percentage, x-axis, time, right? Which mass extinction kills off the highest percentage? Well, you're looking right here. Yeah, it was the Permian. It's percentage of genera. I think Permian knocked out a greater number of species. Describe the overall pattern of extinction. The overall pattern here is that even with the mass extinction events, which there are 5 on record, there's still approximately this 10% line where we lose about anywhere from 0 to 10%, but its average here is about 10% of all species over a given period of time, right? And this evidence that's for this graph comes from the fossil record because we're only living now. So anything that we find lived in the past, and it leaves evidence for us. Okay. Number two is our comparison of gradualism, which is the way that I'm sure you've been thinking of evolution. Small changes, long periods of time. If you follow through here, you see just gradual changes from the blue and then over here. So blue can lead to greens and yellows, but it can also lead to pinks. And that's just an example for your brain to wrap itself around. This could be the size of a wing or the speed of an individual. It could be anything like that. Okay, but you can see these lines are continuous and there's just gradual change throughout. And that's the way you've been thinking of evolution. In punctuated equilibrium, there's this static of, series of years where nothing happens and a major event occurs, which is here. And this line continues on and no change. But something shoots off of it and happens very quickly because this is time, right? And if we're proceeding in this direction on our timeline, then we have to understand that anything that's parallel, or excuse me, perpendicular to that line, running in a horizontal fashion, represents a very short period of time. So punctuated equilibrium. Equilibrium, this is equilibrium, no change, punctuated by events, right? These are the punctuations. So there's equilibrium and then there's punctuation, whereas over here just kind of got these gradual changes just kind of meandering around. Okay, and then you can compare that to genetic change here and here. The greater from the center, the greater the change. Okay. Adaptive radiation is a large-scale event over a long period of time. We talked about Darwin's finches. Y'all should be ultimately very familiar with this. When his finches arrive at the Galapagos, they encounter new environments. Some of them take to those new environments. Some have to find even newer environments when they get to the islands. So this is some of the major groups of mammals here. And as we branched off from our evolutionary origins around 250 million years ago, we've got this ancestor down here. And y'all are familiar with cladograms now. So you can see that cetaceans, aquatic mammals, and sirenians, also aquatic mammals, they have different origins. They're not all in the same group. And artiodactyls here, the camels, and rhinos and elephants, they all kind of diverged off of different groups as they moved into new environments. So the genes that get there become something else. You have to apply that from Darwin. All right. Convergent evolution, this one's also something we've been really looking at. When dissimilar organisms arrive in similar environments, they should trend towards the most beneficial outcome for the genes that they brought there, okay? So all organisms that live in water, we're going to say all there. It's not exactly the case. Remember, I told you a long time ago, never say all when it comes to biology. But we can look at fish, birds, and mammals that when they're in the water have the same idea. I'm going to be long and hydrodynamic. I'm going to have flippers. And if we look over here, we discussed these guys when it got to biogeography. They all have very similar adaptations, but they live in very different places in terms of distance and ability to get to each other, right? So Australia's been separated, but you still find porcupines or the echidna. We have porcupines in North America. The pangolin, oh boy. Crazy, huh? Y'all know this came out of Wuhan, right? Okay. Armadillos. Napoleon, fix yourself one of them armadillos. Giant anteaters, the aardvark. That's Africa. That's not in Antarctica. But these guys have similar strategies. Kind of a shell or spines. They have a similar body plan. They have long snouts, the way they eat. So these are called analogous structures. These are structures that did not arrive from the same evolutionary line. They still share homology. Their bones are mammalian homologous bones. But since they evolved in different locations, this body plan that the pangolin has, and the aardvark, and our anteater, and the armadillo, and to a lesser degree the echidna that can be seen, that emerged. So their snouts and their tails and their shells and their body plans, they're not homologous. They didn't get it from a common ancestor. It developed on its own for the same function. So similar in function, but different in form. So the analogous structure of a bird wing and a bat wing, they came from different evolutionary lineages. They are homologous in the fact that they are vertebrates and bones, but horses and monkeys and humans have the same bones. The limb itself, the wing in mammals, the wing in bats, that's a case of convergent evolution. The wings in birds and the wings in mammals. They arrived at that conclusion independently on their own, given the homologous bone structure. Right, so analogous results in similar function, but does not come from the same evolutionary history. And then finally, our last major event is coevolution. So this is the process that allows two species to emerge together. Now, Darwin had a neat little conjecture here. We mentioned him here. This is called a proboscis. I'm going to go off the... Whoa! Oh, I made an O. The O was a... Come on. Go away. Oh boy. Okay, we're back. So proboscis, let me try that again. Well, that's in black. That's not going to work. Here, third time's a charm. That's this thing. And obviously, it looks like a tube or a straw, right? Well, you're right. It is. And what that's for is finding any nectar that's down inside of the plant. Well, Darwin found an orchid that had a very long spur, essentially long enough for him to say that there was a special pollinator for this, because it was too acutely conspicuous. It's very obvious that this evolved to match something else. Here's something a little bit more similar for you to digest, a little bit more easily digestible. Cheetahs and gazelles. That's a case of coevolution. Which gazelles survive? Faster, more camouflage, better in some way. Which cheetahs survive? Faster, more camouflage, better in some way. So as the cheetahs get better, what do the gazelles have no other choice but to do? They get better as well. So coevolution is when the changes in one organism drive adaptations in another, which ultimately lead to their new adaptations and their new changes, which then drive it in the other direction as well. So when two species are found to be very cooperative in their life, they likely evolved in the same way, and that's coevolution. There's your homework. I'm out.